Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Was my flight delayed? Is that what that was? I'm not in the mood for delays, Tony. We're as you're watching this, we're probably almost on the way, almost out to California, something like that. We're flying out on Sunday. We're recording a couple shows early so that you guys have stuff. Because as we talked about in one of the earlier shows, as soon as you're on the West Coast, you wake up and you're behind. You wake up at 6 a.m. and everyone is already sitting at their desks at work in Ohio. So we have to get a little bit of an early start, because also this is a very compacted trip, not as much time. And boy, howdy, is there a lot of stuff to talk about.
A lot of stuff to talk about. We are still working through the listener questions episodes, which is what we're doing right now. And we're not going to get through all of them this time.
We might.
Today.
We might.
Oh, really? Well, I don't know how that's possible.
Well, we're going to do our very best.
We'll see. Unlevel best to try and get this done.
All right. So the first one from @BigDrill: does the staff let the Big Ten know the incredible inequity in holding calls against Ohio State versus their opponents? Do they expect that issue to carry through the playoffs?
Yes, you should expect everything to carry through the playoffs. It is interesting though, the change in terms of like Big Ten basketball and how different it is once they get to the tournament, and the calls are all different because Big Ten is much more physical. We did see more penalties called against Tennessee than we normally see against Ohio State's opponents. Mm-hmm. But it was still, I think it was 6 against Tennessee when they averaged like 9.
Yeah.
So it still wasn't as many as you would expect. But I do expect more penalties called just because the Big Ten calls so few. So if you take the Big Ten out of the picture, the numbers are going to rise. Now, that's also bad news for Ohio State and certain players there. Like you can't get away with necessarily what you got away with against in the Big Ten. And you're going to be playing some really good opponents, as they know. So they know all of these guys that they're going to be playing against. But you can't just assume all of the penalties are going to go against Oregon in this one.
Right. These are two teams that are playing in the same conference that I think Oregon was towards the bottom in terms of opponent penalties as well. So I would assume that both teams will see their opponent penalties a little above the historical average. Yes, the coaches are always lobbying officials. Coaches are lobbying officials on the sidelines. Coaches are lobbying officials via the conference office after games. There's always a, hey, watch out for this. And you will have coaches tip off, hey, watch, they'll talk about this on the broadcast sometimes, like, hey, we're going to run a tackle eligible play. Here's what we're going to do, just so you don't think this guy, so you understand what you're seeing. This is what our plan is. I think there was I think back to the 1997 Sugar Bowl, Ohio State against Florida State, where they ran, was it
John Lumpkin,
yeah, and they snuck him onto the field, and then they ended up getting called back on a penalty. And I think John Cooper at the time said, we told them we were going to do this. This wasn't a surprise. So it's, it's a little bit of a back and forth process. You never get, Tony, 100% of what you ask the officials for, but that never doesn't stop coaches from asking.
No, it doesn't. And even if I were to ask, Tom or I were to ask Ryan Day, hey, have you mentioned to the Big Ten the lack of holding calls against you? And he said, well, we've sent some feedback on that, and you tweet that out, then it becomes crying day. The Buckeyes are whining about not getting calls. Because, Tom, when I tell you that on our podcast that we did talking about the lack of holding calls, and several times throughout the show we're talking about this is not why Ohio State lost this game or that game, so much of the comments were just crying, you belly, that's not why you lost the game. Oh, you're complaining about the refs, and you're complaining about bad calls, you're homers or whatever. It's this is just data. This is just information. You are the ones being emotional about it. We are just saying, this seems odd that Jack Sawyer's, nobody defending Jack Sawyer on the offensive line has been called for a penalty since September of 2021. That's not saying, hey, complaining. This is data. What do you think about that?
I think you need to cope harder is what I think about that. Next one from @Cross1028. Feel like the spy on Dylan Gabriel, Oregon quarterback, needs to be someone smaller and quicker. They flushed him a lot in the first game. Any chance we see someone else spying this game? I think you're going to see a mixture of guys. Nico Iamaleava for Tennessee, at one point they put JT Tuimoloau on him. This is not just NCAA where it's okay, what color is the dot for a spy? It used to be blue, right? So
Right.
the blue dot is not always going to be the Mike linebacker. You're changing your coverage, you're mixing things up. It's going to be different guys at different times depending on the situation, and you're not going to spy on every play. But they are certainly aware of Dillon Gabriel, his speed, his elusiveness, the importance of keeping him contained in the pocket. They know all of these things. I'm expecting, though, the answer to be a whole bunch of different guys depending on game state, down and distance, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't expect it to be a defensive lineman this time because that's not a fair matchup for any of them. And as Jim Dole said, they got to change the picture up and change what they do from play to play. So one play it's Cody Simon, another play it's going to be Sonny Styles, another play it's going to be Caleb Downs. Like it's going to be somebody different. Good news is Ohio State. Sonny Styles is very athletic for a linebacker. One of the earlier shows you'd mentioned how he was a safety last year, and I'm just thinking in my head, I can't believe that dude was a safety.
That was last year.
That was last year. He's playing safety, and so he's a guy that can keep up. But Dillon Gabriel is crafty as heck. He's quick. He's got good speed. So that's even a tough matchup for linebackers. And if you want to go ahead and put a safety as a spy, now you're taking somebody out from the second and third level. So it's not a fun matchup. It's not a good matchup for anybody.
No, and this is why coaches like dual threat quarterbacks. Yep. This is why Ohio State looked at Will Howard and said, "Yep, that'll work." And that's why you've seen Will Howard be effective. He doesn't need to be Michael Vick. You just need to be able to get in the open field. And if you're assuming you're going to see a bunch of man from Oregon in coverage, and I don't know that I'm necessarily expecting that as 80% of the thing. If you're running in man, you're turning your back and you're running with the receiver. Mm-hmm. And that a lot of times when you see teams in man and their corners are turning the back and running, you'll see, go back to like the 2004 Ohio State Michigan game where Troy Smith takes off out of the pocket and is running down the field. And was it David Harris, one of the Michigan defensive linemen, is like pointing at him, like very clearly yelling, like, "Stop that man!" And everyone's turned and run in the other direction. So there's a bunch of different factors that can play into that. Even you wouldn't think are they in man or zone would play into how well can the quarterback run and get out there, but all that stuff can play in there.
And guys like that, offensive coordinators and head coaches say they make the plays right. Like it may not be they make a bad play call right because they can extend it. They can make something go better than it was going. And Will Stein, the offensive coordinator, gets a ton of credit. But a lot of that credit is from a guy that goes to a guy that can make good things out of bad things, because there's so much chaos going on back there, and he's always calm. That's the thing that strikes me most, is how calm he is all the time.
Next one from at OL_Pete 1926. What percentage of your audience would have preferred a 13-10 loss on Tennessee and a blowout win against Michigan? This is one that you've put on our board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. This is one you might have put on Twitter as well. Yes. And Tony, the reaction was enthusiastic.
Yeah. So basically, 4-1 Ohio State fans of the 2,500 plus on Twitter said they would much rather have what's going on right now than the other way around, which I think is the correct answer that you would expect from a non-lunatic fringe. I'm not even going to get into that, but really, you'd rather be playing than not, and that's the situation right now. So of the two scenarios, this is the one that you would prefer. And if you don't, I understand it. I think you're wrong, but I understand why you feel that way.
Yeah, and I think one of the elements to this is that you've got an ongoing season right now. If you take, if Ohio State loses to Tennessee, the season's over and you have no chance at a national championship. Right now, they have a chance at a national championship. If they lose to Oregon and you take this poll again, would you rather have lost to Tennessee in the first round of the playoff or lost to Michigan? You're probably getting at least a slightly different response. But right now, because you're still in the middle of it and you still have a chance at a national championship, that's going to probably skew the numbers a little bit in one direction. But also then you have to, would you rather listen to Michigan fans chirping or would you rather listen to SEC people chirping?
Depends on where you live.
Let me tell you, there's a girl named Sophie. She has a choice. And maybe it.
I do want to apologize for my math. If I said 4-1, I meant 3-1. I am mathematically challenged, as we all know, on the fly. But hearing from some Ohio State fans who live in Tennessee, I would take this.
Oh yeah, sure.
Based on all of the years since 1994 1996, having to listen to Tennessee fans talk about that game and the SEC's dominance over Ohio State. They were very happy with this outcome.
Yeah, and if you ask Big Ten fans somewhere else, they're going to say vote 100% for Ohio State to beat Tennessee, because then, boy, did that at least quiet some of the narrative around the sport.
I mean, look at what the poor SEC's been able to do in the bowl games this year. It's not been great.
Not great. Next one from Whose Mans? How do we expect the defensive game plan to shift? Got it lit up through the air, and there was virtually zero pressure in the first matchup. I mean, I think a lot of that is stuff that's already changed.
Yep.
A lot of the stuff that they did to address that in the 2 weeks after that Oregon game, where they had the week off and then they had the week before the Nebraska game. And they've been much more diverse in their pass rush. The defensive line has been much more aggressive. The defensive line has been doing much more twisting and stunting and all that kind of stuff. And they've been bringing probably a little bit more pressure than they have in the past. And all of the stuff they've talked about is, I've talked to Ross about this on multiple shows, and several times he said some variation of like, boy, this is more of like a Jim Knowles defense. And it's like, it feels like the lesson that got taken from Oregon is fewer people should probably have a vote in some ways, and Jim Knowles should maybe have more of a vote. But I think that, I don't know that I'm expecting the defensive game plan to change. You're obviously not doing the exact same thing you did against Tennessee. It's a different opponent, and also it's all on film now, so you're going to be mixing stuff in a little more. But I think you're going to see, the big change has already happened. Now you're just sort of modifying stuff based on that big change.
Yeah, and we've seen more odd fronts and certainly more blitzing. And whenever you talk to Jim Knowles about, when you guys made that change, that what was it called? That Ryan Day called it you know what I'm talking about.
Reimagination or reconstruction or something like that.
Something like that, where you bring that up. He's like, well, it's just, he's kind of sells it. And it's the execution and calling the right plays and the proper game plan. And really it's like, well, it's also creating more pressure. And that's one of the things that Ryan Day really was adamant, like, we're going to get this done. And I think that was a statement as much to everybody else in the defensive staff as it was to Jim Knowles. Like, no, we are doing this. And that kind of gave, I think, Jim Knowles the freedom to do that more confidently and more just freely. But then you've got to go and tackle this guy. So you can go ahead and create all the pressure you want, but what are you doing when you've created that? Are you containing him? Are you maintaining your lanes? Are you maintaining the integrity of your defense? Or are you getting a little crazy because you start chasing him or you try to get to where he's going to be? And now there's a big play that you just let happen.
Well, and Jim Knowles was asked, how confident are you that you've really addressed the issue? Because they haven't played an offense as good as Oregon since they played Oregon. So it's fixed the problem, but it's fixed the problem against varsity level, All-American level. Has it fixed it against Heisman level? Yeah, we'll find out. He says he's always confident, but we'll find out.
That's that Philly bravado. Some would say Philly arrogance. He would say that.
Next one from @SaintEasy. Do you think Jermaine Matthews will get some playing time against Oregon? Knowles was asked directly about this, and he said, yep. I mean, and the reason that's getting asked about was Jermaine Matthews did not play in the first game against Oregon, the only game he didn't play all season. Now he's someone who Knowles considers basically a starter. He's not a starter, but he's considered a starter, where if you have to take a starter off the field, they don't feel like you're taking a big step back by putting him out there. If you have to, Davison Igbinosun needs a rest, or Denzel Burke needs a rest, or whatever, you put him back out there and they feel like you're still playing at, basically the same level.
Yeah, they consider him a starter. That was a game where I think everybody at one point was like, maybe they should put Jermaine in there just for a little bit and give Denzel a break and let him kind of just regroup and reassess things. And that did not happen, but you've seen that happen since. He's part of the defense now. He is an aggressive defender who I think he could have started this year and they would have been fine. Like if Denzel Burke had left, he'd be starting this year. We'd be talking about him as one of the best corners in the Big Ten and the foundation of the secondary next year, along with Caleb Downs.
Yep. Speaking of next season, from @Being in the Arena, and boy, we could go 45 minutes on this one. With all the inevitable losses from the starting 22, do you consider next year a rebuild for Buckeye football? And who do you predict to return from those units? So
This is a separate show, Tom.
This is probably a separate show.
This is a separate month.
I think rather than getting into who's going to return, because I feel like that is a whole separate conversation, and a conversation that might depend somewhat on how do the next 3 weeks go. That's, if we're standing here on January 21st and there's a trophy in the lobby behind us, that's a different conversation than if we're standing here on January 21st and saying, Ohio State football has now had 3 weeks off after losing in the Rose Bowl. Those are two separate conversations. I think what's maybe the question we can address right now is rebuilding year for Ohio State football. What does that look like? Because I know historically Ohio State does. They used to sell T-shirts in the bookstore that said "We don't rebuild, we reload," and that's been the case in Ohio State for 30 years now, maybe more. But I mean, like, what does a rebuilding year outside of a post Catgate crater where you've lost a bunch of starters unexpectedly and you lost your head coach unexpectedly. Outside of that, a rebuilding year has been like, the worst rebuilding years have basically been like 7-5, 8-4 kind of years, something like that. I think the talent level right now at Ohio State is better than it was during the Cooper to Tressel kind of handoff. 2004 is maybe the closest analog, where you had a couple of teams in 2002 and 2003 teams had so much talent and it all kind of left at the same time. So then you had that 2004 team, but now you got the transfer portal. So I don't, 8-4 feels like that would be like that's not a rebuilding year. That's a disaster. So, what's a rebuilding year? Is it 10-2 and you still make the college football playoff? Is it 9-3 and you just miss it? I don't know what that means.
Ohio State will be either the first or second most talented team in the Big Ten next year. So that's a playoff.
Yeah.
That's the playoffs are the goal. Like there is no rebuild. If they're rebuilding, it's another coach doing it, or there will be another coach doing it the year after. Like, you have so much talent. You'll have a 5-star quarterback two 5-star quarterbacks on the roster next year. You're going to have a load of running backs. You've got as much offensive line as you've had. Like, yes, find some tackles. They've done that in the portal, like you said. They're adding a tight end. The defensive line is going to be a concern, but there's talent there as well. And maybe they won't be as deep as they've been in the past. But again, like, who is right now, who is more talented than Ohio State in the Big Ten next year?
Oregon ? I mean,
they're losing a ton
let's
too.
see who's coming back for them.
Who's their quarterback?
Yeah, right. Dante Moore.
Right.
Yeah,
and he's got more experience than Julian Sayin. But they're going to be losing a ton of guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're bringing in a ton of guys. And so all this is kind of goes into the, you don't really get rebuilding years anymore. That's just kind of, look at Indiana. Indiana went from dead last, terrible, fire your coach, complete lost cause, to the college football playoff in one season. That no one gets a year zero anymore. It's just that. Yeah. Congratulations, welcome. You better win right now.
Yeah, like Purdue, Ryan Walters gets fired not just because they're bad, but because how good Indiana was, but also because they were bad.
Yes, also that, and boy, did they get their money's worth on that one. How bad they were. Go back. How many years do you have to go back for Ohio State to not make the college football playoff under a 12-team format?
2011?
2011, yeah, which is the bizarre one-off. So before that, it's 2004 probably, unless there's a weird season that I'm not thinking of where they lost a couple games.
Because they went to a BCS bowl game every year under Terrell Pryor. Even as a true freshman, he took it to a BCS bowl game. So if you're making BCS bowl games, you are in the playoffs, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so it's been 20 years, where you had a non-Tatgate year. So, I think the baseline expectation for Ohio State is you make the college football playoff. That's what a rebuilding year is. It's probably 10-2 and you make the college football playoff as, I don't know, the 8 seed, something like that. I mean, it's this has been what's your schedule look like? They have to play Texas next year. And so you could have a loss there, and then we'll see. But yes, I think the baseline expectation, even in a rebuilding year at Ohio State, is you're making the college football playoff. Next one from at TJ and Seaview. What is the maximum distance you're comfortable with fielding, kicking a field goal? I'll go first, never kick a field goal. I answered this one on the last show. You can answer the slightly different question on this show.
Well, I think if you are a college kicker, you should be good and I say good, like 80% on 42 and in. So 25-yard line, it shouldn't even be a concern. Now, the wind is a concern. Not in the Rose Bowl, it won't be. Footing won't be a concern. But if you are a scholarship quarterback or a scholarship kicker, or you are the team's kicker, you should be able to kick a 42-yard field goal consistently. And frankly, you should be able to hit a 50-yarder much of the time. And I say most of the time, at least half the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that should be a thing that you can do. That should be an option for the team. Now, having missed some attempts, does it not become an option because, you know what, let's just not risk it. Let's just keep the ball. That's fine. We said it before the Tennessee game. The only real excuse or reason to kick a long one is end of game, end of half, desperation type of thing. And that's exactly what that was. Like,
yeah,
you'd rather try a 56-yarder than attempt a 40-yard Hail Mary because you think your odds are slightly better of making the kick. Like, that's the same situation going into this game, but you should be able to make 42, 45. And yes, I know, college kickers, but this is what you do.
Right. Yeah. You literally have one job. And so, I would say you should feel, low to mid 40s. Anything beyond that, I think his career long is a 45 or a 46, something like that. I would not expect someone to hit a career long in a game of this magnitude. I think you've got to, you have to assume that you've got to get inside the 30 to be in any kind of reasonable field goal range, because they don't have the big leg kickoff specialist who could just, step in and we'll try the 63-yarder. You don't have that guy. You tried a 56-yarder and the ball got 4 yards into the end zone. So very clearly you don't have that guy on the roster.
Can Nick McClarty kick a field goal?
Only one way to find out. Next one from @Coach Pilarski. Any lineup changes / injuries for the Ducks on their offensive line or defensive line since they last played the Buckeyes? Those defensive tackles were demons in the first game.
They're pretty healthy at this point, right?
Yeah. Jordan Birch is going to be back, defensive end, and he's number 1, which looks awesome on a defensive lineman always, especially a 290-pound
he's a
lineman.
Big defensive end.
He is a big edge guy. That's going to be an interesting matchup for Josh Fryer or Donovan Jackson. But those, as we talked about on one of the earlier shows about those two guys have been pretty solid.
Yes.
And you would look at those guys and think you're probably, if you're a guard / tackle type guy, you're probably more concerned about the real fast edge guy, the Abdul Carter type rather than the 290-pound guy. Jordan Birch, fantastic.
Right.
And then the two tackles inside, Derek Harmon, the former Michigan State transfer, and Jamari Caldwell, who is 990. Harmon wears 55. Caldwell, I think, wears 90. Those guys were dominant against Washington and then completely invisible against Penn State. So which one will they be? Shrug emoji.
Yeah, and even the other outside rushers are big guys, like Mateo Uyunglele, and the guy they have behind him, I forget his name at the moment, but he played a lot while Birch was out, and Mateo was basically in for Birch. So those three guys will kind of just rotate, and they're all bigger dudes. So not that makes things easier. It's just you don't have to necessarily worry about the speed as much. And we're not saying those guys aren't fast. We're saying they're not 6'2", 240 pounds. That's what we're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, you can create mismatches in a couple different ways. They have one of the ways, not the other. So this is from @Elbazani, and this is a multi-parter. This is a Tim May special.
Just a couple of quickies.
6 quickies here. Why no 2 punt returners at the same time? Why no Bear defense on 4th and 1? Why no 9-man offensive line on 3rd and 1? Why no Hicks on the defensive line in obvious blitz situations? Why not take out tight end on obvious pass situations for mismatches like at the end of the Michigan game? Let's just go one at a time. Why no 9-man offensive line on 3rd and 1? We saw them in 14 personnel against Tennessee in a goal line situation. So that's when we talk about personnel, 14, 1, 4. The first number is wide receivers. Second number is running backs. The implied third number is, running backs first, tight ends second. The implied third number is wide receivers. So 10 personnel, you've got 1 running back, no tight ends, 4 wide receivers. 14 personnel, you've got 1 running back, 4 tight ends in the field. So they basically ran a 9-man offensive line against Tennessee. So that's one. Next up.
Well, I think some of that is also like the Battle of Thermopylae. There's just a bunch of people here and you can't really move forward. Mm-hmm. Like if you sometimes it just clogs everything up when you do that. Next one, why no Hicks on on the D line, or no, which one are we? Why no two punt returners at the same time?
You take whichever one you want.
I always like the two punt returners at the same time because I go back to Santonio Holmes and Ted Ginn. It's like, have fun with that. Have fun kicking to those guys. Yeah. I always think that's a good look. And sometimes they have done that where they've got a guy that's kind of up there to help block, but it's just a preference of whoever is designing the play. Some guys like it, some guys don't. And some guys are good at it, and some guys aren't.
Well, and you also are taking another guy out of the mix, and in a game like this with Dan Lanning, who is pretty YOLO about special teams and trick plays and all that kind of stuff, you now have two guys who are out of the box. Yeah. So you're playing an 11-on-9 in the box in terms of that, and you potentially are creating some mismatches for your defense not in a good way. Let's see. How about why no CJ Hicks on the defensive line in obvious blitz situations? They have other good options there. I mean, CJ Hicks they sort of are trying to find a role for him, and it feels like he probably will have maybe a slightly different role on next year's team. But who are you taking off the field? Like, yeah, he's good at that. Do you want to take JT Tuimoloau off the field? Do you want to take Kenyatta Jackson, who's taking a bigger role? Do you want to take Jack Sawyer off the field? Do you want to take Sonny Styles on the field? Sonny Styles is also good at a lot of the stuff that CJ Hicks is good at. It's not that CJ Hicks couldn't do it right now. It's the old Jim Tressel line about why don't you throw to the tight end more? Well, because if I throw to the tight end, then I'm not throwing to Ted Ginn or Santonio Holmes. And why would I not do that? That's what they want me to not throw to Ted Ginn. They want me to not have Jack Sawyer on the field or Kenyatta Jackson on the field. So why would I do that?
Well, and I also think they've given him opportunities to do that, and he's like 50-50 on when he gets through whether he can tackle the quarterback. Mm-hmm. So he's missed the quarterback. So I think that is also a concern. You don't want to put that in there if you can't count on him. And then the last one, Tom, why not take out the tight end on obvious pass situations for mismatches at the end, like the Michigan game? For one, they like if they're going to go no huddle and kind of trap the defense out there, they want to be able to go from a running offense to a passing offense. So you keep the tight end on the field. That allows you to go from 11 to, basically whatever you want. However, at the end of the game, I don't have a problem removing the tight end for another receiver for putting, Brandon Ennis out there. But really, how much of that offense do they even run where it's you've got two slot receivers? They just don't do it a lot.
No,
so,
yeah.
You got to do what you do well, I guess.
Right. And yeah, there's benefits to the tight end. The tight end feels like it's gotten, gradually become a bigger part of the pass game this season. And G. Scott had some big catches against Tennessee, and Will Kazmarek had one and is, back, and they talked about him being how effective he is in the blocking and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it.
I think also if you pull a tight end off the field, you're going to pull a linebacker off the field, and you put a receiver in there. Now you kind of lose the matchup advantage that you would have with a linebacker covering G. Scott.
And we do need to wrap up. We did skip why no Bear defense on 4th and 1.
Oh.
One thing is, if teams go hurry up, you can get trapped with that defense on the field, and you don't want that defense on the field in some of those situations. So that's part of it. And this kind of goes back to the Battle of Thermopylae, which a phrase that I thought I would definitely be saying on this show. You can counter, and if you do one thing, they're going to do something that sort of counters that. And then you also have the threat of the running quarterback. If you're in bear front and you're running, everyone's coming right up the middle. Guess what? You run a bootleg with one of these mobile quarterbacks they're facing, you got a problem.
Yep. So there you go. We made it. All 25 questions or so over the past week. Want to thank you all and everybody that sent them in. We do appreciate that. Helped us get some stuff out there in preparation for our trip to the Rose Bowl, where we are now, currently, as you're listening to this and watching, probably already there. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. Hit that thumbs up before you go. If you're watching on YouTube, bell, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And of course, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We'd love to have you there. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.